Hi again, everyone. It's JPierce again at _JPierce. And I've got another image tutorial walkthrough for you today. This is a pretty cool one. This is an image I called Vaporize. We've got some interesting stuff happening. We've got this amazing looking glowing sun and this incredible looking reflection. A lot of cool color happening. And then we've got these rocky structures with a person standing on it, and some nice depth with our mountains in the back here, and a beautiful sky. Sort of a rocky mountain lake look to it. And so we're going to start in the background here with these mountains with a tool that I love. It's called World Creator. And the folks at World Creator are working on a lot of updates, and they make this really great piece of software. It's from a company called Byte the Bytes. I use it for a lot of landscape generation. So this is the software, and so we'll start in World Creator, and we're going to make our mountain in World Creator. And so I have a new project. No, I don't want to save. Just do a new project. This is the default setup, and if you're not familiar with World Creator, there's some good tutorials online. So I'm just going to do some basic stuff just to make a basic mountain. So I'm going to start off by editing my custom base shape. Is something that I want to have turned on so that I can edit these things. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a filter. Under the filters tab, I'm going to go and make under general zero edge, and that's going to flatten out all the edges because we want a central peak and we don't want to have a bunch of terrain sticking up around the edge. So we start off with zero edge, and then back in the base tab I'm going to edit the shape, and we're going to bring up a nice peak in the middle, and maybe we'll adjust, bring it up, bring this one up, and so we've got a nice looking rocky peak, and maybe we'll round it out a little bit more on the back and bring this one up, and maybe bring these out a bit. It's a great tool. It's very easy to learn and get into. It's amazing how quickly you can make stuff in this software. And then we're going to apply a few more filters. So under the filters tab, I'm going to add first a ridged filter, and already it's looking quite mountainous and cool looking. I'm going to leave that how it is. And then we're going to add a mountains filter, and that's going to give us some nice more detail, but it's too strong, so I'm just going to bring down the general strength some pretty low because we want these ridges. And then I'm going to move the ridges to be after the mountains because these are going to be applied in order, and you can adjust that with these arrows. So we have a mountain filter, a ridged filter, and when you use all these in combination, you get some really neat looks. And under the effect tab, I'm going to apply a rugged filter, and that's going to give us these nice looking lines that pull down, and we get these sheer cliffs on the sides here. And inside of World Creator you can actually do a lot of texturing, but we're going to save that for Octane. So this is really looking very cool, and we don't need to go too much farther than this. I think sometimes I'll add an erosion, this one called erosion fluvial, and that'll give us some more lines, some more extra erosion looking in this area here. Down here we get you know, now it looks really like a spectacular looking mountain. And so we'll leave that on, but we'll take it, we'll maybe reduce the general strength some. And if I'm not liking the way this looks, there's an overall seed value here that I can start to modify and get some different looks. I think I like that better. We have this nice little crevice here, and that looks really cool. That's a really cool looking mountain. So we're going to keep that. And now what I want to do is, by default, in precision, I'm working at 2048 by 2048, but I want to have an 8K displacement map. So to do this, I change the precision from 1 to 1/4. And you can see now my resolution is 8192. So we're at 8K, and when we get in tight, there's a ton of little detail in here, and that looks really cool. So to export this and bring it over into Cinema, all I do is over here under the export button, on surface, I want terrain height map, and the format I like to use is TIFF, and I like to use 32-bit float TIFF. And then I just hit export. It's going to ask me where I want to save this, and I'll save it to my tutorial folder, and we'll call it Vaporize Tutorial 2. And you'll see that this exports very fast. I'm not even going to jump the video because of how quickly this goes. And you know, I do have a pretty powerful setup here, but like that was what, maybe 8 seconds. So now we're going to jump back over to Cinema and get started with our mountains. So here we are in Cinema, and what I'm going to start with is a plane. I'm going to set this plane to 4000 by 4000 just to give me some sense of scale. And the first thing we're going to do for this image is walk through just texturing some of this mountains. I just want to touch on how powerful World Creator is, again, at making terrains. I know I like to do in my videos a lot of hand sculpting inside of Cinema, but all of this kind of stuff for the backgrounds and you know, these eroded looking mountains, it's just amazing how quickly you can do this stuff in World Creator. So to bring this in, I'm going to apply this new texture. This is a blank Octane diffuse texture to my plane. And while we're at it here, I'm used to working on 2 monitors, but this will be fine for our tutorial. I'm just going to set up a light so that we can see our plane. So here we have our plane, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my aspect ratio properly so that I'm at 1080 by 1350 for this image, which is the aspect ratio of this image. So here's our plane, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the mountain that we just made is I'll show you the folder. We have a TIFF file now, and it's black and white, and we're just going to drop it into the Octane node editor. And did it come in? There it is. And I'll take a displacement and apply it to the displacement, and then I'm going to plug in my displacement from World Creator. And now under the displacement, I'm going to set my level of detail to 8K, and then my plane, which you remember is 4000 by 4000, so we'll have it be 4000 by 4000 by 1000 in height. And there it is. And so now we can take a look and see we've got all that great detail, and our lighting is looking pretty awful right now, but you know, there's no color on this yet. So we've got all that great detail. It looks really nice. We've got our mountain inside of Octane, and it looks pretty sweet. So now I'll show you just very quickly how you can texture this. I'm going to start by making it a glossy texture and setting the roughness around 0.3, and then taking the specular down to something like a mid-level gray. And you're not going to see much here, but so I've got a really basic looking rock texture here that's just some gray rock, and this is actually from the Forester library of materials. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the diffuse, and there it is, and that looks not good. So so the first thing we'll do is apply a UV transformation to it, and we'll scale it down some, and that's fine for now. Let's look at our light and see what kind of lighting we can get on this. So you can see just by moving the light, there's a lot more detail there that we weren't seeing before. But so the next thing I'm going to do is start bringing out some of the more details in here. And if you really want to get into it, you can export a normal map from World Creator as well. And that's going to bring out a lot more details too. But for the purposes of this, these being in the background, I don't think we really need it. So we're going to bring in some more details using a dirt node. So what I'm going to do is add a multiply node into this tree and add a dirt into this tree. And what the dirt's going to do is it's going to act like an ambient occlusion mask. And so it's already going to be applying dark color. So I'm just going to increase all of these some, and then the radius is really where you're going to see it start to fill in. And so you can see as I increase the radius, you can see all these dark areas start to fill in. And we've got some cooler looking texture here. And then, you know, I don't want to go too far into this, but you know, I can also go in and add some. So I've added darker details, and if I use another dirt node, I can add some lighter details. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to grab another dirt and an add node, and this time I'm going to add white on top, because multiply you use when you want to add dark color, add you use when you want to add light color. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use a gradient, because by default it's using a smooth black to white gradient. But if I put a gradient in here, I can specify what colors of dirt I want to be adding on. And I want to be adding white, so all I have to do is invert these knots. And now, and then I'm also going to invert the normal of this dirt. And now what you can see is when I start turning this up, you'll see some other areas of white being up here, and that's the opposite of what I want. And so maybe I want this one to be inverted, and then this one to not be inverted. And there you go. And so now I have some dark areas on the ridges, and then I have lighter areas down in between. And I think it's too tight, so we're going to increase the radius and then decrease the strength. And that just helps to bring out some more of the details in all these striations that we built in World Creator. So I think I want a little bit less strength. And now the really cool thing to add on top of this, we're going to get just an RGB spectrum, and so we're going to put some snow on here. So we're going to use an RGB spectrum, and then we'll use a mix node, and I want this base texture to be my texture 2, and I don't want this amount to be driven by my base texture. I want the base texture to be under texture 2 of my mix texture, and then I want my RGB spectrum, which is just a white, into the texture 1. And then for the amount, what I'm going to use is a fall off node. And what this is going to allow me to do is to color based on the normal. And the normal that I want to use is not the default normal versus iRay. I want to use the normal versus vector 90 degrees. And then this, by adjusting this fall off skew factor, I start to bring it down, and you start to see that it's only applying this color here in these areas where the terrain is flatter. And so that looks kind of okay, but what we really want is to tighten this out and really bring out the details. So the easiest way to do that is to use a gradient to drive where this fall off map is being applied. And just by bringing the black and the white together somewhere in this region, you can start to clamp off these values and really start to get it looking like snow. So there we go. So now we have a pretty cool textured mountain, and you can do a whole render just from this by bringing in trees and other mountains and different sky. So that's it for the mountain. That's really all I have. Back here in the background, just a nice peak with some snow and a little bit of rock texture. Okay, so now that we've got our mountain set up, we're going to switch gears, and we're going to take another plane, and we're going to start sculpting this front terrain here. So I'm going to take another plane, and I'm going to make it 4,000 by 4,000, and I'm going to increase the segments to 200 by 200, and I'm going to switch to hidden line. And I'm going to start by, let's set up a new camera. We want to have our perspective about here, maybe a little closer. I'm going to have our perspective about here, and we'll set up a camera so that we can save that vantage point, and we want to sculpt from this angle because we're going to have this line of rocks, and we're going to be looking at it from over here. So we're going to sculpt this line of jagged rocks that our person's going to be standing on. So to do that, I'm going to break it apart, and I'm going to start with a pool brush, increase the size, increase the strength, and just start by adding some height to this. And we want it to be higher up over here and a bit higher up over here, with some of these edges pulled out some. So let's take a look in perspective, and we'll go some more here, some more here, and we'll use wax to make it less lumpy looking. Well, it depends on how you define lumpy, but to me, this always helps to add just that extra bit of detail. So that looks pretty cool for right now. These are a bit higher up, but we'll bring it up just a bit more over here and just a bit more over here. And you can see it's looking pretty lumpy looking. So that's why I use the wax. You know, using these tools in conjunction is how you get this to look really the way you want it to look. And I'm gonna raise up just this part some more for where our human is standing. And now to add in the details for the rocks, I'm going to load my favorite brush preset. If you feel free to experiment with all of these, I'm a big fan of this Floor Pattern 01. And if you're trying to find this preset, I had some questions about this. You have to be here in the settings. If you go to the stencil, which is actually what this is, and you try and load a stencil preset, you're not going to find anything. And the same thing is true of the stamp brushes. And I don't know why they only show up over here, but you have to be in the settings tab, and when you do that, you'll find all these great presets. So I want to be in a bit closer, because the way the stencil works is if I'm out here and I start painting, the rocks are going to be very large. But if I'm in closer and I start painting, the rocks are going to be much smaller and closer together. So I want to be in pretty close, and I'm just going to start painting some of these rocks in. And it's pretty fun. You can get pretty artistic with this. And let's look from our camera, and there we go. We've got a cool looking rocky structure here. And let's see, I want to lift up just one right here, and so I'm going to decrease my brush and just paint right here and go pretty exaggerated. And let's see if that looks okay. That doesn't look great, so we'll undo. And maybe I just need to be out a little further. And that'll probably work for our little out jutting rock for this guy. And maybe all we have to do is you know, make some other modifications to this without, because once I've got the basic idea here, I can use the other brushes to modify this. So if I just use a pull and reset this to get rid of my stencil, I'm just going to push down here, and you know, really for this, the way I should be working is to set this to perspective and on hidden line, so that I can do my sculpting and still have my view over here by using this second viewport. So that's the way I should have been working, but I think we've basically gotten there. I like this little outcropping here for our person to be standing on. So we're going to leave that, and then I think I'm just going to lift up some of this here so that we have sort of a bit of a shoreline, and then I'm going to push down some of this area for where our water is going to live. And that's the basic sculpt for this front terrain. So there you go. And now everything else is going to come together pretty quickly. So in my preset materials, I'm using RD textures again in this render. They're really great. I'm going to use rock number 14, and I think I'm going to use probably one of these soils, probably soil number 12. No, I think I'm going to use soil number 10. So firstly, let's apply our rock texture to our plane. And already that looks pretty cool. We'll go ahead and set the tiles to 2 by 2. And let's see, for our rock texture here, let's take the displacement and maybe double it to 90. And that's pretty cool. So that's about where it was. Maybe we'll go higher. We'll go 150. And then I can adjust my mid-level because it's sticking out a bit too much. And when I take this all the way up, you'll see it gets very jagged and it starts to tear. But something around 0.8 you'll get very pointy, and something around a 0.1 it's going to be way more rounded. So that's another factor to take into consideration when you're adjusting the mid-level. So I think I like it around here. This looks okay. Now I'm going to duplicate my plane, and I'm going to show you again another technique that I used, that I showed in a previous tutorial, to fill in some of these cracks and make it look as though we have some sedimentation happening. So here's our soil texture, and we want this to be a bit higher, probably around 6 by 6. That's probably good. And our soil, let's bump up the displacement a bit more too, maybe around 40. Cool. And now, I think just backtracking a bit, I think that we don't have enough tiles on here, so we're going to go to 4 by 4. That's looking a bit better. I think I like that a bit better. And so now let's turn our soil back on. So we're going to name these sand and rock and save. And then we'll take the smooth brush on our sand layer, and I'm going to switch to Gerard and turn off the textures. And I just want to smooth in this sand into all the crevices. So use a smooth brush, make it pretty large, and start working the sand down into the cracks using a smooth brush. And so you can see here, now the sand is sort of depositing into the rocks. And the more I do this, the more it's going to kind of melt down into the cracks. And so there we go, that looks pretty great. Very easy technique to mix together two different textures on a sculpt. So there we go, pretty easy. Let's save and drop in our water now. And I'm going to make this 4,000 by 4,000 because that's the size of our other plane, and we'll lift it up some. I want it to be about right here. because in our image it's mostly water in the front, and we're going to set up a new texture for our water. I want to walk you through this great looking reflection here, how that's achieved. Let's go ahead and turn our sun so that we get a better idea of what's going to be, what our reflection is going to really look like. And let's start setting up our water. So for this, I'm going to use a specular material, and let's go ahead and apply it to our water. And for this, I have a link to textures.com. This is actually a wavy sand texture, and I'm going to bring this in to our Octane node editor, and I'm going to apply it to the roughness. And let's see, we're not seeing our texture. There it is. And you can see it's reflective, and it does not look right. So we'll start with the UV transform and start scaling this down a bunch. And I could turn the texture, but I'm just going to rotate the plane because I want my waves in this direction. So we'll rotate it to 90. And now I'm going to add a color correction node to this. And we're going to tweak the contrast and the gamma to get something a bit more like that. And let's see, just adjusting our scale, and this is not going to be that harsh, but it's much easier to see where it's going to be when you put the sun right here. So really our sun is going to be kind of coming in from the side and just lighting these rocks just maybe right in there somewhere. And so that's where our sun position is going to be. We're going to have these little ripples here. And let's take a look at our camera. It's probably too close to the ground. So we'll go up, up, and then rotate, rotate. And there we go. So now on our sand layer, I'm going to start bringing in some more ground over here. And you can do this on the rock layer as well, just with a pull brush. And then maybe a bit here. And what's nice when you have this plane here is I like to go in and just turn on X-ray so that I can see through it. And I'm just going to lift up some sand under here. Maybe I need to pull it up some, and pull up some over here. And then use wax to kind of flatten it. Pull. Just so that it's peeking through just a little bit. And now I can add a scattering medium to my water. So I'm going to do that by applying a scattering medium to the medium and putting in 2 RGB spectrums in the absorption and scattering. And then I'll take the scattering and just reduce it down. Reduce it down. And because of the way our lighting is set up, you can almost barely see it, but you can see some of the rocks under here. And you know, this is all detail stuff, but it does look really neat. And I think in our soil, this soil is just too bright, so we'll adjust the gamma, and maybe it's too just the saturation. So that's pretty neat, and that's really very close to it for the foreground here. Just adjust our camera a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and add in some plants. Just a bit of grass on here. I have a well, I don't know what happened to my plants here. Well, I had a plant set up. I don't know where it is now. But it's easy enough to walk through this again. We're going to grab a Forester plugin, Multiflora, and I'm going to use this wild grass patch. And I don't want these materials. I'm going to use my preset for leaf material, which looks like this. We'll apply it to our grass, and then we're going to get a Octane scatter, and then we'll apply the scatter onto the sand layer. And now, rather than using vertex, we're going to use surface, and we've got a bunch going already. Sometimes the selection is set up and we don't want a selection. So now we've got our plants here, and we're going to reduce the normal threshold so that we don't see them on these sharp angles up here. And then I'm going to add a plane effector and set the parameter scale to -1 and the fall off to linear and Y plus, and the size to 5. And then we'll apply this plane effector to our Octane scatter, and then we'll set the plane inside of the water and reset its position so that it's set to 0. And now we can adjust our grass some. Let's try maybe this one. It's pretty cool. And we'll reduce the size some and go ahead and add a bunch more, take up to 5,000. Now we have some nice greenery spread around here, and that's pretty cool looking. So we've got some grass and some other stuff and some rocks over here. And I know what you're all thinking, when are you going to get to where it looks like this? Okay, so let's bring in our Octane sky. And we're going to set our daylight to mixed sky texture. And then in this render I'm using another HDRI from No Motion HDRIs, and I believe it's this one. And I want to drop it not on the image texture but inside the image texture. And I'm going to increase the gamma a bit and the power a bit. And then we're going to rotate it around to be over here. And maybe I have my power too high. That's a bit better there. Cool. So we're going to leave that where it is. And now we can go back and get our mountain. And let's call this guy mountain. And turn him back on. And it's right up on top of the camera, so let's grab him and move him back in space. And you can just really be very artistic with your placement of where you want these things to be. So rotate and turn. And now, because this plane is technically flat, if I go to scale it up more, it's just going to get wider. It's not going to get any taller because the displacement is being set inside the texture. But if I switch to object mode, it's going to scale this scale, so I can actually increase the amount that it's being quote-unquote displaced by using object mode and changing the actual physical scale values. So what I'm going to do is, work with these. I like to often stretch them so that we get a nice coverage. So we'll set one right there. I'm going to control drag to duplicate, and we'll rotate. And then we're going to control drag and put two more back here. One there. One over here. You can stretch these. And rotate. Let's turn this one facing the other way. And stretch it. Cool. So now we've got our mountains sitting back behind, and you can see that what's happening now is we've lost all the definition. Let's group our mountains together. And Alt-G to group. And when I have them turned off, you can see I've got, we're losing a lot of this definition. What you can see here, we have this profile of these rocks. And when I've got my mountains on, it's all just sort of dark, and you really can't see what's happening. So what we're going to do now is add in, go to Objects, and Octane Fog Volume. Because when we use this fog, it's going to bring out all the definition in the foreground. And I liked how pointy these ones were before, so I'm going to take this one and really stretch it out. And maybe we'll stretch out this one too. Lift it up. That's cool. And I love how artistic it allows me to be. And maybe we just need to move them back a little farther. Okay. So now we're going to take our volume, and under the Generate tab, we'll start off with a voxel size around 900. And then we'll set this to 6,000 by 6,000 by 6,000, and screen goes black. And I like to rotate it so that these voxels are facing the camera, although I don't know that it actually matters. So we're going to set our fog right here, and under the medium tab for the absorption and scattering, we're going to set these to white. And we'll increase the scattering phase and the volume step length, and then reduce the density. And now you can see there's a whole lot more definition on these rocks in profile. I don't think I really like this plant. Let's choose a different plant. Let's just use a POA. I'm a big fan of the POA. So that's a bit better. And then now we're going to add in our sun object, our crazy looking otherworldly sun. So I'm just going to use a sphere. I'm going to set the segments to 90. I'm going to turn off render perfect. And we're going to hide our volume from the viewport. And let's see. Can't see this right now. But I want to have, you can rotate this, but I want to have this, the y-axis to remain straight up and down. So the size there looks pretty good, and we'll set it back right in here somewhere. And maybe we need to reposition these mountains a little bit now. We're not going to worry about that yet. So we'll set up a new material for our sun. This can be a simple diffuse material. All it needs is a texture emission applied to the emission, and not I don't like to use this gradient for this because I found it's harder to work with. So under texture emission, I will take a regular gradient by clicking on this arrow. This is a C4D gradient. I think it's easier to work with. I'm going to set it to 2dV, and then I want it to be, you know, sort of blue on the bottom and then red on the top, an orangey red. And then I'm going to turn on surface brightness, which allows the material to be uniformly bright no matter what scale object it is applied to. So I'll apply it to my sphere, and there you have it. It looks pretty cool already, and by adjusting this gradient, you can see I can get some more blue there in the bottom, and you'll really see it in the reflection there. And so now we're going to go ahead and start playing with the camera imager. So I'm going to enable the camera imager. I use the denoiser pretty regularly. I'm going to go about half on the highlight compression. And we're also going to add some post-processing. So I'm going to enable the bloom and start lifting this up. And for a scene like this, just as a side note, I'm leaving this in direct lighting because in path tracing there's too much scattering happening, and I'm not sure exactly why, but it seems to work better for this type of scene if I'm in direct lighting. So from here you can continue to work with this water, maybe increase the scale of it some, and adjusting the gamma and contrast and even the brightness, just to dial it in to be how you want it to be. It's probably too much. This is too big. And so you can play with these settings to get the water how you want it to be. But another thing that I did was I like to grab multiply node and add in some noise. And that's going to darken in some of the areas. So I'm going to increase the contrast and use a UV transform to increase the size. It's just going to add in some more variation. into our ripples so that it's not so uniform. Maybe something in that region. And there you go. Now it's just a matter of, let's go ahead and drop our guy in here. Cinema comes with these cool ArchViz figures. I think I use this guy. And we're just gonna stick him up here. And we'll rotate him around. And you know, I think for this render I cheated it, so just to convert materials so that his material is an octane material. Here's our man's material. And then I just take this and turn the power down so that he stays nicely in silhouette. And he's floating just a little bit, so we'll adjust. And that's pretty much it, you guys. So to get this final look here, we're gonna jump into After Effects and add some Z depth and some glow. We've got. I just want to set up my Z depth pass to show you how to get this out. So if you set up your render passes in your render settings, you'll get these tabs down here to see which passes you're outputting, and then you can take a look under the info passes tab here, the Z depth max, and you can make sure that you have your Z depth set up correctly. And so I've outputted these 3 passes to After Effects, and so I've got my base render. I'm just going to drag it in to get a new composition, and then I've got my D main layer, and let's bring in our layers so you can see what's happening. And I'm just going to take the D main down a bit so it's not so sharp. And I'm going to take my Z pass and make a new composition out of it, and make sure I'm working at 16-bit. Then I'll make a new layer here that's white, new solid, and drop it behind to get the infinite to be white. And then what I'm going to do is just drag my Z layer on top here, and then I'm going to use an effect called null unmult, and now I've got a nice looking fog. And then I'm going to add a tint, and I want this tint to be something like this pinky color, maybe something in here somewhere. And then I'm going to mask it out so that we get a nice atmospheric fog. And this color is not right, but for now it'll be okay. So I just add a new rectangular mask and increase the feathering. And we've got some cool fog. So this is too saturated and maybe a bit too pink. So there we go. We got a nice peachy looking color for our fog, and that does a lot to add in more depth to our scene. And so you know, additionally to this, you can add any number of things. I like to just add in some vignette. And I want to show you how to do this glow. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm using a Video Copilot free plugin called Saber, and I'll link to that too. I'm going to turn off this layer temporarily so that I can draw a mask on it. This is just a blank black solid. I'm going to come in and make a circle mask. I'm just going to line up my circle perfectly with my sun here. And now I'm going to apply the Video Copilot Saber plugin. And I'm going to set this, I'm going to turn my layer back on so it's visible and set it to screen. And then under Customize Core, I'm going to set it from Saber to Layer Masks, and using this button to turn off my mask. So now I've got this extra glow outside, and oops, and let's, there's all these cool presets in here that you can use, but I think I just had it on something like this default with a nice red color. And let's look at our image. Yeah, something like that, just to add some extra glow. And now, obviously what's happening is we don't want this to be down below. So what you have to do is come in with the pen tool. I'm going to add a point right here, and I'm going to add a point right here, and then I'm going to delete this point. And then to get this mask to not be closed, what you have to do is select these 2 points and then right click on your layer, and under Mask and Shape Path you uncheck Closed. And that's it. That's cool. Maybe this is too thick and it's not bright enough. You can go crazy with this, but that's the basic technique for getting that glow halo around that sun, like I have in my original image. And then I'm just going to add in a levels adjustment layer. And to bring in some contrast. And then another adjustment layer for the curves. And we want to drop out the green. Drop out some of the green, and we increase the red a bit. And then we get this nice cast to it. And so that's pretty much it, you guys. That's all the techniques that went into creating this image. We've got some discrepancies, but I hope you can forgive and understand that these are the basic techniques to getting from 0 to our final image, which is a very neat looking sky and surrealist looking landscape. So I want to thank you all again for watching. Please like and subscribe, and happy rendering.